So I guess we are live now. My very good afternoon for those in Brazil and good evening to those in Ireland or in the UK. Good evening to all. Our research group, Gelilt, welcomes everyone to one more of our encounters promoted together with the Department of Modern Languages of Campus 5 of the University of the State of Bahia, UNEB, based in Santo Antônio de Jesus. Frida mission, I guess, I'm not sure if I am showing. Isadora, is everything okay? I think I'm okay.
Just fine,
So,
Vera.
Good, okay? I will go ahead. So Frida Mission is a University of Limerick Emeritus Lecturer, and we have the pleasure to have her here today. She's got over 40 years of experience in teaching English to students of other languages, TESOL, having taught English as a foreign language in England, Italy, Israel, and Ireland. And then she moved on to lecture on TESOL master's courses and PhD programs, which I had the pleasure to take as I was doing my PhD in Ireland. So Frida was one of my lectures. This was really, 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 really important for my career. So her research interests and publications are primarily in my materials development, including development of intercultural language learning materials. Also the impact of technology on materials development, as well as blended learning and ESOL. She will probably talk a little bit more about this. She is editor of the MATSDA journal, which stands for Materials Development Association. Perhaps Frida can talk to us a little bit more about the MATSDA journal. As for her main publications, we will leave the link available for everybody to have access to all the materials. If I'm not mistaken, it's five books. Correct me if I'm wrong, Frida. And she's got material on material development for TESOL, designing authenticity into language learning materials, TESOL provision in the UK and Ireland, practice and theory for materials development, and perspectives on language learning materials development. So that's quite a lot. And we have the pleasure to have Frida here with us today. Frida, please be welcome. And then I pass the word on to you.
Hello, everyone. Thanks very much, Vera. Will I start? Yeah. Thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. I appreciate that. And hello, everyone, wherever you are. Good evening, good morning, good night. Very nice to meet you all. I must say, and I'm sure that everyone who works online has this experience of, it's rather strange when you don't know who you're talking to. Indeed, if you're talking to anyone at all. But I will assume that I am talking to somebody. So what I'm going to do is, first of all, I'm going to share my presentation, and I'll start my presentation proper. So just give me a couple of minutes. Now, hopefully in a couple of minutes you will see this.
Yeah, we can see that already.
Thanks, Vera. And I'm putting it onto presentation mode. Which should come on soon. One more time. There we go. Now I can see mine in presentation mode, and hopefully you will be able to see it soon. Is that okay, Vera? Can you see that?
That's perfect. I can see it, yeah.
Thanks very much. So, thanks again, Vera. And thanks to Gelilt and for the University, National University of Brazil for inviting me. I appreciate that very much. So, as you can see from my title, I'm going to be talking about the Global ELT Coursebook, A Case of Cinderella's Slipper. Now, I know you're all familiar with the story of Cinderella and the slipper. The slipper would only fit Cinderella's tiny foot. So the idea, the analogy here is that the Global ELT Coursebook is only suitable for one situation. Now, I'm going to qualify that many, many times as we go through, but that's just explaining the title for you. And now, the talk is based on an article that I wrote for language teaching, and I've got the links there, and you will have these slides, so you can go to the article. And just to say that this article is what we call a position piece, which is like an opinion piece. I was invited to write about something I felt strongly about, so that because it's an opinion piece. Obviously, it's encapsulating my own opinions, which are based on a lot of research, as you'll see. But I want to be quite clear that I am treating the Global ELT Coursebook critically. And part of the idea of this, and I discussed this with Vera, before when we set up this talk, is to invite you yourselves to be thinking about your coursebook materials in a critical way. So. This is going to be the outline of what I'm going to be talking about. First of all, a little bit about the international ELT publishing industry and the Global ELT Coursebook. Just a little bit of context. I'm going to be talking about the English language teaching publishing industry in Britain, based in Britain, because that's the one I'm familiar with. So a caveat is really I'm talking about materials that I am familiar with and that I have used, so that this is the British, this is materials published in the British context. So what I say about them pertains to the British context. Now, it may well pertain to your context as well. I don't know, and you can be thinking about that. And well, a global language teaching coursebook is a coursebook that's destined or intended for an international audience, for the worldwide audience. So that's the context. And I suppose just a tiny bit more context, just to emphasize that my own background, and the reason I'm emphasizing this is because culture is very important in all I'm talking about. My own background is that I'm originally English. I'm now a proud Irish citizen, but I've been teaching mainly in Ireland as well as the other countries that Vera mentioned. So that's my own background, because as I would stress, culture is very important. So the first thing I'll talk about is why coursebooks, why learners and teachers like and use coursebooks. And then, well, the bulk of my course the bulk of my talk is going to be why not coursebooks, okay, the arguments against them. Again, this is looking at them critically, and I don't mean to disrespect coursebooks, and I will elaborate on that as we go on. So the main kind of reasons, the main kind of sections would be I'm going to talk about commercialization and the coursebook, because the coursebook is a massive commercial enterprise. And then I suppose the main part really is culture. The main issues are cultural issues. First of all, English, which is a global language, a worldwide language. So, and as language and culture are intertwined, whose culture are we talking about? Then I'll talk about the target cultures. In other words, the destinations for the coursebooks, the international contexts in which they're being used and where they're destined for. And as part of that, I'll talk about the methodology that's embedded in the coursebooks that we're using. The second part will be talking about second language acquisition research, which is a massive field, of course. And I'll be looking at how this research has been taken on board by the coursebooks, how it's been used in coursebooks or not. And finally, I'll try and sort of finish on upbeat note by talking about ways forward for language teaching coursebooks and materials. So, quick context for the ELT publishing industry in Britain. Long-standing commercial success, as I said there, from 1926, when the first publication came out, which was a Longman publication, New Method Readers by Michael West. So huge commercial success built on that, building up to apparently an annual turnover of about $194 billion. In fact, details on turnover are surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, hard to come by. In fact, I got this from another article, another ELT article. I couldn't actually find any information on this from the publishers themselves. And just to give you an example of where this turnover comes from, Headway, which is one of the best-selling course books ever from ELT, British ELT publishers, published by Oxford University Press, has sold over 70 million copies. Okay, that gives you an idea of the business that we're talking about, the big business that we're talking about. Okay, well, as I said to you, I'm very much talking about my own context. So I want to show you, these are just the covers of some of the books that I'm referring to, that the issues that I'm referring to would be and within these type of publications. So you've got English File by Oxford University Press, Face to Face from Cambridge, and English Unlimited from Cambridge, Headway from Oxford, and New Inside Out from Macmillan. Okay, this is the kind of the look and feel of the course books that I'm talking about. And again, you can compare them to your own language teaching course books, whether in English or another language, in fact. So first of all, I suppose the ELT publishing industry has branded the global course book. They're packaged as colourful, attractive, glossy course books, very professionally produced, with huge numbers of support materials, teachers' books, CD-ROMs, DVDs, companion websites, apps, and so on. So when you're buying a global course book, depending if you can afford it, you're buying the whole package. And just to give you, again, something of the kind of look and feel of a course book, that many of you are familiar with this look and feel. First of all, it kind of looks, I think that they're produced to look a little bit like Windows, to sort of appeal to the digital generation. So everything's in kind of boxes. You've got attractive young people, you've got speech bubbles. And so this is the sort of look and feel of the course book that we and our students encounter. So first of all, why course books? So I'm giving the arguments in favor of course books, because as I'm really emphasizing, I'm not against course books. I just feel that they set themselves up to do something that is an impossible task. So why course books? As I've just said, they're ready-made materials from a trustworthy source, as in an international publisher, with all these support materials that I just mentioned. Therefore, they offer face validity. That means that they look like they're going to do what they do. In other words, they look professional. They look like they're going to do the job. And this sets up the perceptions among learners and teachers of what constitutes proper learning materials. And in fact, you can see that when you ask teachers or novice teachers to produce their own materials, they tend to produce something that looks like a coursebook unit or a piece of coursebook material, which shows that coursebooks have set up this perception of what coursebooks should be, of what materials should look like. An issue in language coursebooks that really is its strength, in a way, is that the medium is the message. They're using language to teach language. That's unlike other school subjects like, I don't know, geography or history, where they're using language to teach geography or history. So a language course book, the medium is the message. So it's a very powerful, a very powerful educational tool. Language course books form the syllabus, so that makes them popular, particularly in private language institutions, for example, where they can't maybe afford to produce their own materials. It saves time and money to have a ready-made syllabus in the form of the course book. Very importantly, and this is partly why language course books are so popular, is they incorporate teaching methodology. They've got inbuilt classroom techniques and formats. And that's really, really important, particularly for inexperienced, but maybe new teachers who can just follow kind of the step-by-step aspect of the course book. So there's inbuilt methodology. This gives teachers kind of security. So all of this means that really use of course books is the norm in the majority of classrooms worldwide. Data about this is surprisingly scarce, actually. Although I would point you, if you're interested, to look at course books, how they're used, and if they're used, and so on. Data on this, a new research group called Muse, Materials and Use International. If you Google them, you'll find their website. And they're a new research group set up, and their remit is to study course books in use. So of the information that we have, we've got a survey from Brian Tomlinson, where he found that about 92% of teachers regularly use course books. And the British Council found that 65% of teachers always or frequently use course books. Okay, and you can kind of match that to your own experience. So this is all kind of reasons why people use course books. And another reason why people use course books is kind of, what else is there? Okay, if we don't use course books, what can we use? What is there? Well, the extreme answer is nothing. You can take a dogma ELT approach. This was an approach put forward by Scott Thornbury in 2000. The idea here was to return to the grassroots of the language classroom, who are the teacher and the learners, and so to just use the experiences of the teachers and the learners to form the materials. Okay, which, as you can imagine, is quite a task, and would require a very experienced and confident teacher to do that. In fact, Scott Thornbury put forward this idea. I think it was a little bit just to be provocative. He was counter course book, so he put forward this to be rather provocative, and he's moderated this over the years. And in the end, I was looking at the sort of last publications on this. In 2017, he said, well, maybe dogma really just appears as dogma moments. In other words, learning opportunities that kind of just change the direction of the planned lesson. So in other words, what I would call teachable moments. What else is there? Well, authentic materials, and I've put forward this in my own publication, that authentic materials being materials that aren't designed for language learning, but given a pedagogical framework. But of course, this involves a lot of work. It needs a teacher who's has experience, probably, who's confident and creative. So work and time. What else could you do? Well, you can cut and paste from other course books and sort of put together your own syllabus, your own units. Copyright issues there, of course. Or you could use resource books. Resource books are books that very often put forward different approaches for language teaching, like process drama or learner-led teaching, or the use of literature, the use of film and so on. These are resource books. So you could use those. But all of these require selecting and adapting for your context, experience, confidence and creativity, facilities for printing, photocopying, and possibly, transferring into to put online, and therefore time. Okay, so you can see, interestingly, that the reasons I've put forward, or the reasons I see as why course books are practical, are very much why course books are popular are very much practical reasons. So now, of course, I'm going to move on to why not course books. So this is sort of moving on to the bulk of my talk here. Well, the first issue is, surprisingly, maybe in a contradictory, paradoxical way, is their very commercial success. Global course books are now a recognized international brand. And Bellingauer, who've written a very interesting chapter about producing a global course book, talked about the all singing, all dancing, glitzy, expensive multimedia package. Now, this was them talking about, their own book. They were talking about producing Intermediate Matters by Harlow Longman back in 1998, I think it was, or maybe before that. So the first thing then is its very commercial success is sort of questionable, because commercial success doesn't equate necessarily to quality. If you think about best-selling novels, for example, a best-selling novel isn't necessarily wonderful writing. Okay, so commercial success does not equal quality. The next thing is success leads to replication. There's what we call a self-perpetuating washback effect, whereby course books have the same look and feel, and they have had the same look and feel for the last 25 years, because this look and feel is what works. And I can vouch for that because I've been teaching that long. So basically, the main problem that I'm talking about is here. The core problem is here, okay? The clash or the dissonance between the source culture, that's where the course book is produced, and the target cultures, I put an S there, the target cultures that they're destined for, the international audiences all over the world that they're destined for. And this is the core problem. They're destined for an international market, but they're written within a specific native speaker situation. So the materials, the topics, the teaching approaches can never be a fit for so many diverse end users. That's why Bell and Gower have called writing course books materials for the world a great compromise. They say that the term global course book is misleading. They say it really means a course book for a restricted number of teaching situations in many different countries, rather than all teaching situations in all countries. They say that many of the cultural contexts in the materials and text topics can seem irrelevant to the learners, and this is a big deal, and I'll talk about this quite a lot later. Just give you an example. I didn't put this on a slide actually, but I was flicking through my course books, as one does, and I came upon this just to give you an idea of a cultural context from a core source culture that the writers believed would be relevant and interesting to the target cultures. I don't know if you can see this actually. I'm just wondering if you can actually see this. But anyway, what I'm holding up there is pictures, a unit from English File, and it's called The Year Our Heroes Died, and it's got a series of pictures of heroes, so-called heroes. We've got David Bowie, we've got Alan Rickman, we've got Harper Lee, we've got Muhammad Ali, we've got Prince, we've got Leonard Cohen, and we've got Carrie Fisher. Now, I don't know if these are your heroes. In fact, they're not even necessarily my heroes. But the assumption is from the writers that these would be heroes, that this would kind of have resonance with the users as heroes for them. So this is just illustrating how cultural contexts, text topics aren't necessarily relevant to the learners. So we'll talk a little bit more about the source culture. So the nature of teaching language is that it encapsulates the language's culture. So it makes any language textbook a de facto cultural artifact. Well, that makes sense. But in the case of English, which is such a widespread language throughout the world, which culture are we talking about? English straddles cultures worldwide in very different, vastly different contexts of use. I've got native language or L1 use in what we call inner circle countries. I'm not sure if you use these terms. I know they go in and out of fashion, but anyway, I think you know what I mean by these. So the L1 speaking countries would be Britain, Ireland, Australia, New Zealand, and the USA. Numbers wise, about 388 million people are native, so-called native speakers of English. Then you've got 1 billion speakers of English as an L2, as a second language, in over 50 what we call outer circle territories, so Singapore, India, Malawi, and so on and so on. And we call those different Englishes that are spoken in those countries. We call these world Englishes. Then there are over 1 billion speakers of English as a lingua franca. That's what we call ELF. Lovely acronym, that. Over 1 billion speakers of English as a lingua franca in around 140 countries. So I've got this data, these figures, by the way, from David Crystal, from his Encyclopedia of the English Language, which is a wonderful reference book to have. So the total number of English speakers in the world is over 2.3 billion. And there are 1.85 billion English learners in the world. So apparently 1 in 4 people in the world is learning English, which is tremendous. But a piece a figure that I want you to think about actually is that, according to all this, L1 speakers, first language speakers, are outnumbered by L2 and L speakers by 5 to 1. So if we need to think about this when we're thinking about the type of language that's presented to us in our course books. So we're going to look at how UK-based ELT course books portray and reflect this diversity of English speakers, linguistically first and culturally as well. And then we'll also look at how they cater to the diversity of English learners worldwide, of course. So, to what extent do UK-based ELT course books represent this huge linguistic diversity of English speakers? Well, I guess I don't need to read you through all of these, but basically what I've put together here is a number of different studies, and there are lots of studies, lots of reviews of course books that have looked at a lot of aspects. And this aspect, obviously, I was exploring to look at this type of Englishes that were used in the course books. So in the first one, in these 10 course books that Vettorella and Lopriore looked at, they said there were no significant changes related to the plurality of Englishes or ELF. Characters continue to be prevalently native speakers, settings and accents, and the accents are overwhelmingly inner circle Anglophone ones. Same thing was found in the study by Tomlinson and Masuhara, inner circle voices and predominantly British. The next study, 6 more course books from 3 major British ELT publishers, and here they were looking at the written texts. The vast majority represented a single variety, British English. Another one, another study there by Buckledy. The majority of spoken models in the listening materials were RP. I'm not sure if he means RP, which is received pronunciation. Possibly he means British English, which is just standard British English. And the conclusion there by Marin English, having done a larger survey, was that there is a non-native speaking presence, and it has increased slightly in the latest generation of course books, but they tend to be presented as language learners, and so by implication they're not competent English users. So I would conclude there that it's rather ironic that a publishing empire that's built on the diffusion of the English language across the globe as a lingua franca and in the form of diverse world Englishes only minimally acknowledges these forms in its course books. So I'm going to leave that question hanging there just a minute and move on to look at to what extent do UK-based ELT course books represent a cultural diversity of English speakers. So again, there's been a lot of research about this, and a point that's been made again and again is that, as Gerardet says here, a shift towards international settings, showing international settings, doesn't inevitably entail a non-Anglo-centric perspective on English and culture. So if you look at this, this is a page from English File 2019. I've tried to use recent books to show that I'm not just talking about books that are out of date. So in this, we see this is about a charity in Uganda, and we see orphans. They are orphans from this charity, and we see the secretary of the charity, Jane Cadwallader. Well, there's a number of things here, I think. One is that this, to me, seems smacks a little bit of a kind of a post-colonial take on overseas settings, and I'm going to expand on that a little bit. Now, that's going out there a little bit, but I would suggest that this is maybe there is something of that here. And also, I would say that this actually epitomizes one of the topics in course books, which tend towards presenting charities. Almost every course book presents charities. I'm going to pause there for 1 minute, please. Sorry about that. So moving on to how far our course books represent cultural diversity of English speakers. Well, do they even portray cultural diversity in Britain? I want to show you this. We've got here an article on, which is from English File again, 2019, on Debrett's, which apparently is a British publisher which specializes in books about modern manners. And she discusses the types of inquiries they've had about manners, about etiquette. And she says, just moving down to the second paragraph, the most frequently asked questions about manners have changed a lot over the years. But in 1994, one of the most common questions was, what should you do if you meet the Queen? So again, we're sort of homing in on a very specific kind of demographic here. The royal family seems to infiltrate every course book. It's almost as if there's some sort of clause in the contract that the authors have, that they have to include something on the royal family. So English File and Headway 2019 both had articles on the royal family. So really, they're despite having a superficial international gloss, these UK produced books are fundamentally very English, and they portray a fictionalized Britain, which seems to be, well, I suppose unfair really to learners. Today's Britain, anyone who I don't know who I'm speaking to, but maybe there are some English or British listeners out there. It's very multicultural, it's very diverse, it's culturally, linguistically, and socio-economically very diverse. So why this failure, or is it a reluctance to show this real Britain in course books? You've really got a misrepresentation of Britain in UK ELT course books, a fictionalized Britain, if you like. And again, I want, as I've said right at the beginning, although I'm presenting my own opinions in a way, this is based in research, and there's been a lot of complaints along these lines. It's been said that the Britain that's shown is cosmopolitan, well-educated, aspirational, successful, middle class. What you see is happy, shiny people with perfect teeth. This, according to Mike McCarthy, who is normally very balanced in his views. And he's writing about English File 2020, so the very latest version there. There is some ethnic diversity if you look through the pictures and so on, but mostly it's within this socio-economic class and mostly well-off middle class. So just to push this a little bit further, and again, I'm really going out there a little bit here. I'm just pushing it a little bit, just really to be a little bit provocative. It would seem that the British centeredness of the books suggests an adherence to sort of this post-colonialist attitude of Britain that's maybe never gone away. Maybe this is despite, or maybe it's because of the global spread of English. So is the ELT industry a form of neo-imperialism, because of post-colonialism? And again, this isn't only my view, been put forward very solidly by the likes of Robert Phillipson, Penny Cook, and Kanagaraja. All of them have written extensively on this concept that geopolitical colonization by Britain has been replaced with a linguistic and hence, more dangerously, an embedded cultural one. So we could say in a way that the growth of English is an intrinsic part of general economic globalization. It's perpetuating linguistic hegemony, replacing geopolitical hegemony. And is this a legacy of the British Empire? Is, after all, the ELT industry a co-conspirator in post-colonialism? Well, Ping believes this. She says, ELT is not a neutral endeavor, but a cultural and political practice which has to be understood with regard to global and local power relations. So this is sort of a critical pedagogy take on the world of course books. And I talk about critical pedagogy a little bit in a minute, but I just finished this by saying, well, Brexit. I don't know if you, in Brazil, you may have been spared the fun and games of Brexit, but Brexit was when Britain has exited from the European Union, and over the last 4 years, there's been like a painful divorce as Britain extricated itself from the European Union. But really, the basic core philosophy of Brexit was this kind of post-colonial idea, the idea that Britain should stand by itself, that it should be independent from Europe. So these Brexiteers had these kind of beliefs, it would seem. So just to go on to talk about critical pedagogy a little bit, because this is really important. Critical pedagogy has to do with the view that the tenets of any educational system reflect societal norms and values. Okay, you might have heard of the concept of a hidden curriculum. Cunningsworth put it like this: a curriculum and teaching materials form part of this cannot be neutral, because it has to reflect a view of social order and express a value system implicitly or explicitly. It's also, this is expressed very well in this course book, which again I'm showing you, but I'm not sure you can see, a book called Language, Ideology and Education, The Politics of Textbooks in Language Education. And what they say at the beginning of this book is that textbooks are sociocultural materials. They're the products of complex, selective processes reflecting political decisions, educational beliefs and priorities, cultural realities, and language policies. As such, language teaching and learning are not ideologically neutral practices. They are located within complex webs of political and historical contexts and sociolinguistic practices, all of which is mediated through the textual and visual world of textbooks. Okay, so this is very strong here, and this is really my whole argument here, is that we can't escape from this power of the textbook. From this research here that I'm quoting here is from an Iranian perspective, and they go further, because obviously they're using ELT, British produced ELT course books in their own context and finding problems. They say that language in a textbook isn't simply a linguistic system, but contains and expresses aspects of culture. Of course, the same agenda, but with a cultural focus, may be pursued in ELT materials. It's important to investigate its realization in ELT textbooks, as there is otherwise a risk that textbook users may treat embedded cultural aspects and values as something to be acquired as part of successful TL learning, or target language learning. Well, that's quite scary, that they're saying that not only obviously the learners are trying their best to learn the language, but as part of this, they see this language presented in this kind of value set, and they think that, oh, well, they need to acquire this value set in order to be a successful speaker of the language. So this brings us to conundrum of the Global Coursebook, the problem, which is how to present the language that's essential for attaining L2 competence within an acceptable cultural frame of reference. So this is something I'm going to explore now. Well, one thing that's been done in global course books, for global course books, is that course book writers of global course books are asked not to include certain topics in their course books. Okay, there are taboo topics. Okay, and these are encapsulated in this acronym parsnip. Now, I think this is a bit tongue-in-cheek. I think it's not a serious acronym, but it does definitely include all the taboo subjects, which are politics, alcohol, religion, sex, narcotics, isms, as in communism and feminism or whatever, and pork, so as not to offend users in Arab countries, in Muslim countries. And you can probably match these against your own course book and think, well, actually, do they actually include these topics or not? And you'll probably find not. So has this helped? Well, McCarthy again says course books are there thanks to parsnip and this type of risk averseness. Course books are blocked from portraying anything but a particular version of reality by risk-averse publishers. So we're left, I suppose part of it is that by taking out the parsnip topics, which are all the interesting ones, we're left with innocuous, inoffensive topics. So jobs, technology, leisure, shopping, family, relationships, travel, environment, entertainment. You'll, again, be very familiar with these topics probably in your course books. But the problem is that these, in British books at least, embody middle-class Western values of ambition, individualism, assertiveness, consumerism, and materialism. And again, you have to think, well, you know, are these values the same as their the values of their audiences, of their international audiences? I'm going to give you a little example of something that I think very typically embodies Western values of consumerism and materialism. This is from English Unlimited. It's a Cambridge University Press publication. And the title of the text is Declutter Your Life. Clutter, rubbish, stuff. Call it what you like. We've all got so much of it, we're drowning in it. It gradually takes over our houses and our lives. All this stuff has become a huge source of stress today, affecting everything from our lifestyle choices to our personal development. Now, this is what we would call a first world problem. In other words, having too much stuff is a first world problem. Go to the third world, it would not be a problem. You know, they wish. So you can think wherever these course books are being used, it could be that an article like this just has no resonance at all to their experiences. You know, they wish they had enough money to buy excess stuff. Okay, so moving on to continue on this vein. This clash of values here is expressed here by Shah and Ahmed and Mahmoud, who are writing in a Pakistani and Saudi Arabian context. They say that foreign language textbooks are replete with various instances of foreign culture that counters the indigenous cultural values and morals. Certain patterns of behavior in English-speaking social contexts are not desirable, being incompatible with local values. So they're really saying like it is. They're saying that the sorts of values that are being taught, you know, obviously unwittingly through these English-produced materials are not compatible with their own. And I'm just again going to give you an example here. You can see this is an extract here from Inside Out Upper Intermediate. I've seen this taught actually by students or trainee teachers on our master's course, and I've seen this piece being taught by them, and I've often kind of sympathized with them, thought that it might be rather awkward for them depending on the students. Now, most of our students actually in the University of Limerick are Erasmus students. That is, they're on in a European exchange program, so they're mostly European. So I think probably their value set isn't too far from our own. But if you were, trying to teach this somewhere, in Saudi Arabia or Middle East or so on, you could see that this really wouldn't be suitable. So the conundrum that we have, how to present language essential for attaining L2 competence within an acceptable cultural frame of reference, is this issue of cultural sensitivities. And as Tomlinson and Masahara point out, textbook content can be espoused uncritically by its users. Users and some teachers, of course, aren't that critical in their use and choice of materials. So there's a risk that this cultural aspect, as I said, unintentionally influences users. I've talked about the idea that values embedded in textbooks can be identified with successful language learning. I've said that. And then even things that we would include to avoid sensitivities that we would consider as cultural universals, things like family and relationships. Even these can't be guaranteed to be cultural neutral or inoffensive. Vera mentioned earlier that I was involved in a publication on ESOL, and ESOL learners, in our context, are learners, that's English for speakers of other languages. They're learners that have, the migrants who've come to Britain or Ireland or the States, of course, because they're refugees or they're asylum seekers. And in one example in my ESOL book, one of the practitioners gave the example of a young refugee who hadn't seen her mother for years, who she burst into tears in a speaking exam when she was asked about holidays. Okay, so we think this is kind of innocuous, but it's not. We need to know who our users are. And sensitivities apart, the other issue, and I mentioned this right at the start, is relevance. Texts and topics need to be relevant, because it's difficult for students to identify with the lives represented in their textbooks. And I've just given you some examples here from practitioners in different parts of the world. Paul Benjamin, working in the Middle East, said that the reading texts themselves are about distant places unknown to the learners. And he was talking about actually a Middle East edition of Challenges, which was what we call a versioned edition, which was supposedly tailored for the Middle East. But what they'd done was they had a unit on water. Sounds fine, but what they'd done is they'd given, sorry, I'm reading this because what they'd done is they'd given texts about the natural wonders of Patagonia, the Everglades, and the Victoria Falls. So you can imagine that, well, water, okay, but these aren't wonders that the Middle Eastern pupils would be familiar with. What Benjamin did actually was he replaced them with water that the Middle Eastern students would be familiar with, like the Dead Sea, and indeed the Red Sea. Meliti, writing in the Tunisian context, when she did some research, said that 62% of the participants felt the coursebook content had medium or low relevance to them in terms of their hopes, daily life, jobs, problems, concerns, and leisure activities. And Otley basically said the same kind of thing. He said, presented with an English language coursebook whose content and the values which underlay their content are unfamiliar or even alien, many learners are straight away disenfranchised. Okay, they disconnect. They think, well, this isn't for me. This isn't talking to me. So moving on, still sticking in culture, but moving on to methodology, this lack of fit between culture also relates to pedagogy, to methodology. English language teaching in the West, at least, and again, I'm not sure of your own context, but in the West, we've been under what a communicative language teaching dictatorship for the last 5 years. Quite funnily, when I was writing the article and I put in dictatorship, and one of the reviewers came back and said, well, maybe you shouldn't use the word dictatorship. And I said, no, I want to use the word dictatorship because that's the way I perceive it. So for the last 5 decades, in other words, in my teaching lifetime, and certainly in your teaching lifetime, so we've had no other really approach that's been used or advocated in the West, at least. Communicativeness has been used, absorbed by course books, but they've developed and perpetuated their own version of it in the teaching methodology that they've designed into them. Now, we talked about critical pedagogy just earlier, that the tenets of any educational system reflect societal norms and values. Well, CLT, communicative language teaching, epitomizes very Western worldviews, attitudes, and behaviors. And again, we're going to talk about how suitable these are to necessarily to the users. One aspect of CLT that in the West we like is the concept of personalization, which is personalization activities whereby you're asking the learners to talk about themselves or to relate the text that they've just read, let's say, to themselves, okay, to share, in other words. But this concept stems from a discourse of psychotherapy that comes from North American traditions of psychoanalysis, which uphold emotional frankness and disclosure and self-disclosure. In other words, they uphold, they think of sharing as a positive thing. So you've got these type of personalization activities. I've just got 2 samples there. Something like, what do you do when you're angry with a colleague, a friend, a relative, a child? Who do you feel closest to in your family? Why? Are there any relatives you are not close to? Why? to be honest, I would feel a bit awkward about sharing that with other people, let alone people in contexts where this type of sharing really isn't what they do. It can be very alien, very uncomfortable to some cultures. And again, in the ESOL context, the Syrian student said to one of his teachers, "In Syria, we tell our problems to the wall." In other words, we don't share in this way. So you can imagine that when they're being asked to do so under the because their teachers are using CLT, they feel uncomfortable. Another aspect of CLT is that it's replaced a transmission mode, that's like a teacher-fronted mode of teaching, with a more learner-led approach. And this, again, can be uncomfortable for learners from some cultures who are used to this teacher-led approach. And of course, in CLT, there's a more inductive approach to learning grammar. I'll talk about that a bit more in a minute. Learners are asked to infer grammar rules and not necessarily have them presented to them. So some students, used to a much more presentation mode of teaching would say things like, "They're not teaching us grammar." Okay, again, this was a Syrian student in the ESOL context. So Marin English sum this up quite nicely. They say, "The soil in which CLT is rooted, its pedagogical inheritance, is different from many of the contexts in which it has been introduced." So there's a methodological misfit in the global coursebook, which is almost like its ultimate paradox, because it's got these wonderful internationalized trappings, settings, pictures, and so on, but you need an appropriate pedagogical framework to be effective. So, as I said, the communicative approach is basically Western and not suitable for all markets and contexts. I'm going to move on now to the second part of my talk, and it's not quite as long as the first part, you'll be pleased to hear, which is talking about whether coursebooks have taken on board the findings of second language acquisition research, which, as I said before, is a massive field. So have coursebooks actually taken on board these findings? Have they absorbed these findings in the way that they teach, in the methodologies? In second language acquisition research over the years, there's been a sort of a paradigm shift in our understanding of the way people learn languages. Now we tend to believe that creating conditions for inductive learning of grammar rules and language use makes for more effective and durable learning than simply exposing learners to explicit language rules. In other words, we ask learners to look at language, see how it's used, and infer the rules of language use. So there has to be, we think, a balance between declarative knowledge, which is knowledge about language, and procedural knowledge, which is the language gained from using it effectively. We believe that there has to be a balance between these. We also believe that in the importance of the noticing, that learners, as I said earlier, have to be encouraged to notice aspects of the way language is used and learn inductively, and that makes for stronger learning. Another aspect that's been, I suppose, come up in recent years is the importance of affect, as in emotional engagement, and cognitive intellectual challenge in learning. Okay, those are just some aspects. Now, I'm not sure how these match to what you've learned yourselves, but I've just kind of given a massive generalized overview, really, of SLA in the last 50 years or so. So my question there is have these been adopted into coursebook pedagogy, and if so, how? Well, one aspect that seems to have been absorbed is the concept of noticing, is the concept of noticing, which is the idea that learners have to be invited to notice aspects of language. The pedagogical realization of it is what we call consciousness raising, CR. And we do see some instances of this in coursebooks, but in a quite an interesting kind of version of this. So I'm going to give you an example here. I don't know how well you can see it. In this, students have read a text, they have it beside them as a text on speculating, in other words, on using modality. And they're asked to look at sentences 1 to 7 from the article, which are listed below, but these come from the article, and asked to define what, to identify, what is the meaning in each case. So they have to identify in each sentence if it means I'm sure about this, or if it means this is a possibility. So in the first one, if you can't see someone's face, this will influence your understanding of what's going on. So I think this means I'm sure about this. Okay, and the second one, they won't learn about body language, tone of face, and facial expression online. So I think this means I'm sure about this. 3, people may start to find the real world boring. I think this is a possibility. Okay, so that's the way this works. So that's fine. So they're really being asked to kind of infer meanings rather than being told this is what this modal uses. Okay, so these are kind of controlled consciousness raising exercises. But the problem is that then immediately they're told to go and look at the grammar check. Okay, so they're not really given the chance to assimilate language. The whole idea of consciousness raising and noticing and learning inductively is that you have to assimilate, you have to process. And students aren't really being given the chance to. They're immediately sent to the grammar check, which gives them the rules, as it were. So this is kind of an accelerated version of consciousness raising. So it's kind of almost like paying lip service to it. But not engaging with it fully, I suppose. Now, another aspect of second language research that we've engaged with over the years is the importance of effective and cognitive engagement, as I said earlier. These are vital for motivation, which itself is vital for learning. And apologies for this kind of very short summary of how learning occurs. Now, from an effective point of view, course books have aesthetic appeal. They're colourful, they're varied, they're professional, and so on. But there's a tension with parsnip. Remember, these are the subjects that we're not allowed to talk about: politics and alcohol and religion and sex and narcotics and so on, which are, as I said before, are kind of the interesting things. This makes for rather sanitized texts. Okay, and these quotes here, again, these are not my own. These I've taken from well-known writers in this area. They talked about sanitization of the world of the course book, about neutralization, how bland they are, bland, dry, dull, and that they're talking about safe, harmless topics. So in other words, all of this inhibits affective and cognitive and intellectual engagement. If everything is, safe and harmless and inoffensive. Just going to look at this a little bit more. You'll be aware, I'm sure, this is an illustration of Bloom's taxonomy of the higher order thinking skills, which go from remembering and understanding, higher to applying, analyzing, evaluating, creating. Creativity being the topmost thinking skill, the best, the highest quality thinking skill. And that's why Google and Facebook are always looking for employees that are creative and imaginative, because it's thought of as the topmost thinking skill that builds on and incorporates all the others. So, and these are very important for learning, of course. So it's a very interesting study done by Diane Freeman into question types in course books, and do they stimulate higher order thinking skills? So what she found, interestingly, was that in the question types, there was a preference for explicit comprehension questions, whereby the answers were directly stated in the text. In other words, question, and you can go to the text and find the exact wording. Okay, so that engages you at a kind of a lower level, remembering, understanding, but it doesn't get you to evaluate or analyze or, of course, create. So basically, the higher order thinking skills that are being engaged remain at quite a low level, and the same for the affective skills. this is the emotional skills, if you like. And I always think this is kind of harder to define. These are defined as lower order, receiving and responding, okay, then valuing, then organizing. And the topmost one is entitled characterization by value set. What that means is empathizing with others, accepting others and empathizing with them. Okay, that's the meaning of that. I think it's not very clear. So that's considered the topmost effective skill. And of course, we can see that this idea of empathizing and accepting others is really important for intercultural competence, among other things. Okay, so, but again, Freeman found that the effective skills that were engaged really were just responding and valuing through, for example, personal response questions of what do you think, that they didn't reach this topmost skill of empathizing and so on, which again would be much more important for language learners to develop their intercultural competence. Well, in seeking to engage affect and cognition, what about authentic materials? Are these used in course books? Which you would expect would do this. Well, again, you're probably familiar with the course book's use of authentic texts. Well, they are used in course books, but they're almost always adapted as regards length and or quality. Okay, in this study here by Clavel, Orita, and Fuster Marquez, they studied 60 written texts within 6 different books, and these were high-level books, B2, C1, so that's like advanced level. And almost all of them had been adapted in terms of quality. By that, they meant lexicosyntactic rewordings and or length. The texts were standardized, in other words. Idiomatic expressions and varietal variations were substituted with standard British English. So again, this was very reductive, and it denies the students the cognitive challenge of engaging with real-world texts, as well as, of course, exposure to the real world. Another aspect of this is pragmatics. And by pragmatics, what we mean is the words that we use versus what we really mean by them. So, for example, if I come into a classroom full of students and it's very warm, and I say, oh, it's very warm in here. And what I would expect is that a student might go and open a window or turn on the air conditioning. In other words, by saying, it's very warm in here, what I'm actually saying is, could somebody open a window? Could somebody turn on the air conditioning? And that's an example of pragmatics. Now, is this illustrated in course books? Do we have good training in this in course books? I'll give you some examples. Okay, so in this task, students are given this model to check with each other if they've done a series of tasks for booking a holiday. Okay, so they have to ask each other, have you, booked the tickets? Have you booked a taxi? Have you found a hotel, and this kind of thing. So this is the model they're given. Have you booked the tickets yet? No, I've already told you, I haven't done that yet. Now, what you've got here is the problem, because course books are trying to economize by combining grammar practice with pragmatics. Obviously, the present perfect here. Have you booked the tickets? No, I haven't. But the pragmatics completely doesn't work, because if you teach your students to respond in that way, they're going to lose their friends very quickly. Another example here. This is from Headway, how to make short answers sound friendlier and more polite. So again, really, this is practicing short answers. This is practicing the simple past. Did you have a good day at college? No, I didn't. I didn't think the lessons were very interesting today. So again, this isn't working very well pragmatically. It's really just practicing the simple past. I looked at a corpus example from the British National Corpus. Now, I think you're familiar with corpora. Just in case you're not, a corpus is a massive database of language compiled by uploading language from written text and from spoken language as well. And corpora these days consist of hundreds of millions of words. They were originally produced for dictionary, to produce dictionaries actually. But these days they're used for language research and also for language learning and a little bit, to an extent, for language course books, as we'll see. So in this one, what I tried to do was I tried to find a sort of similar example. Mother says, "Did you have a good day at school?" Mother, "What did you do today?" Son, "I did a painting." Okay, so there you see a much more natural kind of probing of what you did. Admittedly, this is kind of a sulky teenager type exchange, which if you have a sulky teenager, you'll know exactly what I mean. But I mean, it's much more authentic anyway. Now, the good news is that the winds of change from SLA have been absorbed in some respects. Corpus linguistics has been used in course books, most particularly in the Touchbook series by McCarthy, McCurtain and Sandiford, whose course book is what we call corpus informed. In other words, all the material it uses comes from the corpus. So here's an example. Here's an example of the use of so, which, as they say in the corner on the right-hand side, they say in conversation, so is one of the top 20 words. And again, you'll probably be very familiar with that. And here they break it down to sort of the way we use so. So it can be to start a topic, so it's your birthday, to check understanding. So they all came, huh? To pause or let the other person draw a conclusion. They all came, so, or to change a topic. So that's what happened. They all came. Okay, so you can see here that corpus linguistics used in course book materials can be very successful. This, by the way, used the the Cambridge International Corpus. And in fact, although Touchstone is the only one that was fully corpus informed, there are other corpus informed course books that use corpus a little bit less. We've got Innovations by Darren Walkley, which used the lexical approach, which is corpus based. Face to Face used is corpus informed to an extent. Objective First Certificate as well, and they use data from the CIC again and the Cambridge Learner Corpus. A lot of corpus, I put all course books now use the CEFA, the Common European Framework of Reference Levels, which are from A1 to C1. I'm not sure if you're familiar with those because it is European. When I put all course books, I then checked actually not all course books use them, but most of them are using them now. But the point about the CEFA is that it's based on corpus informed lexical and grammatical specification. So we have got corpus kind of entering into course books in some way. So I'm actually going to synthesize what I've just said, that I believe that there's an uneasy symbiosis between the ELT publishing industry and second language acquisition research and applied linguistic research. I've basically stressed the overambitious scope of the markets of the global coursebook means that it falls between two stools. It tries to be all things to all men. As Singapore Wala succinctly put it, the coursebook is the way it is because of what it tries to do. So really I'm emphasizing that I'm not disrespecting coursebooks, but they've set themselves an impossible task. Okay, well, how can we go forward from after all this? One thing I think has been implicit in what I just said, just the last part really, is the lack of interdisciplinarity. If the applied linguists talk to the publishers and authors, maybe it would be a little bit more successful. Michael Swan pointed out that he said that in the case of global best-selling titles such as Headway, the authors, who are Liz and John Soares, undoubtedly have a greater impact on language learners worldwide than applied linguists, but they, the authors, are effectively invisible in the academic world. So he's just stressing there the lack of interdisciplinarity. Okay, way forward, well, localization is one alternative. Localization refers to course books that are produced, as their name sounds like, they're produced locally, they're produced in the context in which they're used. For example, Spotlight on English is produced in Algeria, English for Life in Singapore, Primary English and Go For It in China. These are produced sometimes by publishers from the country, sometimes in collaboration with English authors or publishers. Go For It was co-written by David Noonan, for example. Another way to sort of tailor course books is via versioning, so that specific versions are produced for specific contexts. So we've got Polish and Spanish versions of Face to Face, Chinese version of Inside Out, and a Middle East version of Challenges, although that was quite unsuccessful because I mentioned that earlier. So that's another way, I say, of really tailoring books for their contexts. Another area, and this is massive, but I'm not going to go into it here, is the potential of the online environment. Huge flexibility. I mean, if materials were online, they can be tailored, they can be updated, they can be changed, of course. And another thing, and this is something I'm looking at in the work I'm doing at the moment on intercultural materials, is that the online environment is an authentic intercultural environment. It's diverse, it's cosmopolitan, and it's a great place, like a third place for students to interact. And of course, the pandemic has really shown how innovative educators are. Well, not just educators, in fact, everybody has moved online with the pandemic. But it's shown really the innovation, the ingenuity, the creativity of our sector. And maybe this is a kind of a good opportunity to sort of reinvigorate the language teaching and material sector. So that's my positive end. And just before I finish, just want to plug the Matster International Conference. It's online, of course, August 11th to 12th, developing L2 materials and designing language learning to promote creativity and criticality. We would love to have subscribers to this. We would love people to contribute. And okay, this is just a screenshot, but I've given the link up here. It's Matster there. You could go online, and if you're interested in submitting a paper, we'd be delighted. And Vera mentioned their Folio. Yes, I'm the editor of Folio, and again, I would love submissions from people. If you want details, you can go online to this link here and find out the details of the length and so on, or you can just contact me directly. Okay, well, these are my references. Thank you very much for your patience, and I'd be very interested if you have any questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you so very much.
How
wonderful is that? Oh my God, if we could, I'm sure there would be a big round of applause now. No, it's a bit strange, really, this mode, but we have to get used to it. It's what we've got for today, isn't it?
Indeed.
So, but I can see from the chat, perhaps now after talking, you will feel more free to perhaps go really to YouTube and have a look at the chat and how people are discussing things there, which is interesting. And meanwhile, I would like to add one more example, perhaps, to these many examples that you gave of lack of relevance. Let's put it this way, not to call it irrelevance. Lack of relevance of topics and things like that. So I did remember something. I'm not really sure if it was from Headway, but I think it was. But anyway, it would be problematic wherever it would be. There was this sentence for a short dialogue for a very basic level of English. Do you have a Gucci bag? So all the students, I knew before that the students would just not say anything, not even comment, not even say who is Gucci, what is Gucci, or what do you mean by Gucci? They wouldn't even ask this question because it was so far from the context and from the social environment that they were in. So there was this question: do you have a Gucci bag?
Yeah. So I mean, that's values as well, isn't it? Because if you, I'm sure you know, people, these massively expensive what we call designer bags, and as you say, there's only one kind of small sector of populations that can afford it or be familiar with it. So it's so value laden, just that one question, isn't it?
It is very much. I know that you are focusing on cultural relevance, but then we could also focus on the context in terms of economical backgrounds. And sometimes they are, not sometimes, many times they are very inappropriate, I would say, or perhaps not fitting, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah.
I imagine that some of your questions that the participants posed there, in some of them. But I'm sure they would like to have perhaps some complementation to it. So I will obviously repeat some of them. But before going to the questions, I would answer to your question. You asked if we were familiar with the European framework of reference. And the answer is yes. That applies mostly to private language courses here, or perhaps university courses as well, because we want to make the students familiar with it, so that when they go and take their English tests, perhaps some of them will, not many of them won't take these exams. I'm talking about TOEFL or IELTS or FCE, CAE, CPE, etc. But yeah, we are familiar with the framework of reference, although it's questionable if we should follow it as a guide. Now let me see. I've got here some of the questions I would like to pose to you again, and I'm sure Isadora will also post some of them on your screen if you are following from YouTube, obviously. But I do have some here.
Oh yeah, well, no, I do. I see them there. Well, I see something anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
Can you read Savio's comment?
I can see a comment from Savio. He says, which Britain do these books depict a very aspirational one? Yes, that's what I was saying. That's very, very clear from looking at the text, the pictures, and so on. And this is throughout the literature. This is what is said. So as I said, I'm not this isn't my own idea. This is something that's been noticed and lamented by much of writers in the literature. Yes, indeed, Savio.
Then I've got here, which is something that is not really a question, but perhaps Isadora could also pose it to you. There was something before, Isadora, about he's glad that his friends are being mentioned. If you find that, to show Frida. And while she tries to find this comment, there was a question from Neko Obuneko. I know who it is, actually. It's not Neko Obuneko, but it's one of our lecturers. And I guess she's using her son's computer, and that's why it comes as Neko Obuneko. Nubia, oh Nubia, I know it's you.
I've got young learners. It's nice to see I have young participants here.
Well, she asked something, and there was the beginning of an answer from Savio, actually, which was very interesting because it was quite related to what you were saying, and I'm sure you could complement Savio's answer. The question is, are there publishers who are not from the hegemonic countries? If so, could you exemplify?
I'm not really sure what you mean there.
I think that she means if you are familiar with some alternative books that are not produced by British editors, that's what she means. And then Savio answers. I'm sorry to put the answer before yours because I thought it was very interesting. And he says, exactly answering to Neko, there are publishers everywhere, Neko, but the power of the industry is huge. Sometimes a local publisher is more Anglo-centric than a British publisher, for instance. It is a matter of mentality too.
Yes, yes. This is very true. I mean, I said this about the idea of face validity earlier. Is looking at these, these huge publishers, these course books from these huge publishers. They are the ones that seem to be the most professional ones, or the right ones. These are taken as the paradigm of materials. So yes, and that influences. Not only teachers, I gave the example of teachers designing their own materials, but also publishers who are all over the world. Yes. I'm not sure if that really answers your question.
Yeah.
But I gave an example there of localization, so that there are lots of examples of those, and I wouldn't know, just examples is all I can give you. And these are course books that are produced in the local context, sometimes in collaboration with English or other publishers or authors, and so they can be, they will, I suppose, avoid the impact of this sort of hegemony, as you're calling it.
Right. Another contribution on the same theme comes from Patterson. He says publishers have 194 billion reasons to keep doing what they do. They will only change when their pockets feel the hit. And that hit should come from us. That I like.
Fantastic. I like that, Patterson. I think I'll use that in my next article. Thank you very much.
There you go. It's on your screen.
Absolutely. Pattersonic. I'm sure that's not your name. What was I going to say? Oh, yes. The attitude that they have is that this saying we have in English: if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Okay, this thing is working really well. We'll just keep on going with it. Okay, and they're almost like complacent. I believe they're almost like complacent. Well, it's been working for 25 years. We'll just keep it going because this is what works.
Yeah, that's the way it is. And I have to say that I do remember one task that we were told to do during the material development components that I took during my master's. And we were supposed to, I do remember my lessons. So we were asked to produce 1 unit of a material, 1 unit of a course book. And I also do remember that it went just as you said some minutes before. You were saying that the way we produce is very much following a recipe that has been going on and on and on. And I myself probably did something quite similar to what has been done there, although we were working in a group. But there is really this tendency of working in a certain sequence, with certain topics. And I'm sure that I did something like that. Food for thought.
I'm trying to remember the piece of material you produced. I know it was very, very good, as they all were actually. But yeah, I mean, it's natural to kind of default to the recipe, to the model the structure that you're used to, and that's natural. I think that the online environment kind of gives us an opportunity to get away from that, though, because it's multidimensional. So I think that's as I said, and I didn't have time to develop it really, I do think that's the way forward.
I think that takes us to some of the comments as well, because as they say, it's a matter of mentality. I would add, yes, it's a matter of mentality, but also a matter of education and preparation for it, to recognize these problems, which is very important, because I would probably not do the same task in the same way now.
Yeah.
And I have. Go ahead.
No, all I was going to say, it's a question of raising awareness. I mean, the whole point of this talk really is to raise awareness, to get people to think critically. That's all you need, is to just start thinking in a little bit of a different direction, or to think, or to actually criticize, using the word critical in a different way, to actually criticize the materials, or feel free to criticize. And I think that's a problem that I used to find with teaching practice, which I did with students on the masters, was they felt they couldn't criticize the materials. So the first thing I used to tell them is, you can criticize the materials. I think they're really criticize away, not in so many words, but I would encourage them, because they think just because, as soon as you see something printed, you think it's gospel. and that's, you know, that's what you have to get away from.
Frida, I have left the link available for some of the lecturers or anyone from our collegiado, we call it collegiado here, to join us. So if Sally would like to participate or to pose a question, if you're very welcome to show up here too, Sally, if you like. And meanwhile, I have to say that we have participants who are experienced professionals, like lecturers, coordinators taking part of this event, including lecturers from other universities. Savio, for example, is from the Federal University of Bahia, UFBA. He has been working with us very regularly, which is very, very good. Thank you, Savio, very much. He was actually one of my supervisors. I mean, the local supervisor, because we have to have a supervisor here and abroad. And we also have, there you go. There is Sally.
Hi.
Hi, Sally.
There she is. Hi. So yeah, I will set the word to Sally now.
There's a couple of questions you've missed actually, Vera. Ali's hasn't got the link. Ali's asked a few interesting questions. But anyway, let me just I'll just talk a little bit about some of the work we're doing, Frida.
Right.
Alexandra, who's one of our colleagues, she's actually developing Afrocentric English materials. No? She's just starting a project, and it's great material. Another colleague has just produced a book of Afrocentric teaching materials. Now, because here in Bahia, there's a huge percentage of Black people and African descendants. No?
Mm-hmm.
Ali's already told me not to use that word now because we have to talk about all the different African countries. No?
So careful.
Yeah, but so she's producing some great work, and I've been producing materials for several years, trying to use the local context, trying to bring the local context into the classroom, and also to bring subjects like sex, sexuality, race, to discuss these issues, because these are issues that stimulate students. They're what makes them want to talk and give opinions. Craven Milton, for example, he's for several years he had a project called Weaving Readings, Reconstructing Identities. And so he talks about the difference in the English language classroom. So actually, I think if you think about it, our collegiate is doing some great work actually. Can you hear me?
I'd be very interested to hear about it. Sally, what books were you using? You're obviously producing your own materials because you're dissatisfied with whatever you were using before. What was your kind of default material that you were using?
Well, we are still using this material, and your talk was so stimulating because I've gone back into the English language classroom recently after a very long period of teaching other subjects, and we're using English file at the moment, and I'm having huge problems actually, and but that's also partly my fault. I'm using the books to introduce language structures, and it's just they're not. What I found is they're not noticing. Like you say, students. I was sort of expecting them to notice the structures without me pointing them out very much, without working them, presenting them, and then I'm just expecting them to start producing the language, And so I realized that how important it is to take 5 or 10 minutes, focusing on the different structures, for example.
And to recycle, Sally, takes time as well. It's not, as you say, take time, like you said in the lesson, but then in another lesson, go back to it. Recycling of language is very important.
Yeah. Well, this is what I'm doing. That's how I think students are still coming to the classes, because I'm recycling a lot. And I'm actually using quite a lot of personalization, which I noticed that you criticized, but
the context.
But I think in the Brazilian context, in the Brazilian context, I think it works quite well. People. In fact, sometimes people say things in class, and I sort of think, "Oh, I wouldn't talk about that."
Absolutely.
So people are very comfortable in talking about their personal life.
I mean, my point there, Sally, was that in some contexts they wouldn't be. That was my point. As say, in my context, certainly personalization works well, and as you say, the students will share the most strangest things in class. It's like, too much information. These kind of things. So, but that's in our context, and that's the European context, which is the context I teach in. But I'm just thinking, as in the context I was talking about, particularly the ESOL students illustrated this to us, how this type of personalization is not what they do. They're not comfortable with it.
Right.
Yeah. So, where are you teaching, Sally? You're in.
I'm one of Vera's colleagues.
Okay.
So I'm at the university level.
She's actually my coordinator.
Right. Well, Sally, I'd be very interested if you'd like to contribute something to Folio. We'd be very interested in getting something. So if you'd like to throw something my way.
Okay. No, I will definitely visit your site and check it out. Definitely.
Yeah, too. Yeah.
It's fantastic. Yeah.
No, Sally, if you allow me.
Like, it's really interesting for me, because I've gone back into language teaching, having been teaching literature and teacher training, and then suddenly I've taken on an English language subject, and I'm finding it so difficult, to be honest. And for many of the reasons that you mentioned. Oh, and I forgot my question. What was my? Do you know what? I forgot my question, Vera.
If you have forgotten, will you have some time to think while I explain something to your material?
Okay, sure.
Sally is actually doing a great job in adapting material, because what the material she's talking about is not really books. We do have a book to sort of as a guide, but the material she's talking about is produced online, and she's done a great job in terms of using local material and things that would make it more involving. I think that in this aspect, she's doing a great job, really. The thing is, as she said, Sally was not very much involved into teaching the language, but other different subjects, right? There is another question that came up here. Can you read?
Yeah. Could you speak a bit more about the power relationship of the material producing, like materials from the global south and from England? How is it to speak truth to power in the publishing industry? Not quite sure. I think I get what you mean, Alejandra, sorry. The course books seem to be produced by a kind of a cadre of writers who tend to be kind of often they're ex-EFL writers, and they all seem to be centered kind of in England, and the South, maybe not necessarily the South of England, but in England, middle class, well off with experience in teaching. So that's the sort of source. I was talking there about the source culture, and that seems to be the kind of centralized nature of production, and that's I suppose what means that's what means that the language isn't necessarily appealing or relevant to other levels of society, or even showing other levels of society. I'm not really sure if I'm answering your question, but I'm not really sure what the question was. If you'd like to,
perhaps you could rephrase it.
Well, I've got another question to come up there. do you know any research about publishing materials in countries like from the south, like Nigeria, Jamaica, Trinidad, Tobago, or Gambia? I don't necessarily, but you know what I would suggest is if you Google material by Brian Tomlinson, he's the president of Matston. He's sort of really started the materials development field. Okay, he's done research and worked everywhere in the world, and a lot of his publications will deal with materials used all over the world. One I'm particularly thinking of, actually might have in my bookshelf, I can't find it. There was a that's it there. Fancy that. English language. This is English language learning materials, a critical review, edited by Brian Tomlinson. I can send this off to Vera if you want. It was published in 2008, and in this he explores publications worldwide. Okay, he has there's people, practitioners on the ground, as we would say, who are talking about publications worldwide. You might find reference to materials you're looking for in there.
That's great, Frida. Thank you. Yeah, it's a good idea that you send me. I think there is another comment from Alexandra.
I hate this controlling ideas we find in English file. Yeah, white savior syndrome. Yeah, that's kind of what I was saying there. It was, first of all, there's the charity thing, which is everywhere in Coursebooks, and secondly, it's yes, exactly this kind of post-colonial thing. Look at us, we're saving the world. Yeah, I find it, I'm sure it's very unwitting. It's completely unwitting, and it's not intended. But I do find it a little bit offensive. I found that a little bit offensive. Yeah, agree with you. I'm not teaching language. We're going to decolonial direction. You mean you're sort of saying you see the context that I'm talking about, and I did specify this at the beginning. I was very much talking about British published books, okay, and they are a specific breed of books, and are they going to go into a different direction? I wouldn't have thought so. I mean, this post-colonial thing is embedded, and as I said, Brexit was a symptom of it, really. It just showed how many this kind of colonial idea is still there. So personally, I wouldn't think that our books would go in a different direction. Books published in different territories, of course, would.
This is what we hope for. Yeah. Now, Sávio Pimentel Siqueira.
ELF, yes. Good question. Some of the books that I looked at, some of the research that I looked at on use of ELF in the global course books, it's not there. It's hardly there at all. Sometimes you might have two non-native speakers talking, sometimes, but very rarely. It hasn't really infiltrated. Again, there's loads of research on ELF, and there's a lot of research that would be in favour of incorporating ELF into course books. Jennifer Jenkins, am I thinking rightly? Writers on ELF, you'd need to explore there. Again, if you Google ELF in Google Scholar, I think Jennifer Jenkins would be one of the writers in this area that will be advocating much more use of ELF. Not sure if that helps. You're very welcome.
Campus. Maybe I should read this. Silvana is just thanking you for this event.
Yeah, very welcome, Silvana.
So Frida, for this moment. Excellent presentation. Frida, thank you very much.
Welcome.
Everyone is in love with Frida now. Excellent live.
Thank you.
That's great. I'm glad about this. But before you go, let me tell you, I was saying when Sally, she had a question, didn't she? And she said that she was trying to remember the question.
Yeah, we talked quite a lot. Yeah.
So as I was saying, we have lecturers and coordinators and people from other universities taking part, and also our UNEB students would be perhaps the biggest part, because we did forward it to everyone, but these are only the the students from Letras, right? Which is the language course, the English language course.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Because of the language used. We do say that the show is going to be presented in English. So this is limiting to some people, obviously.
Sure.
But yeah, we have students taking subjects such as teaching practice.
Mm-hmm.
It's not really this the title, the way we call it, but it is teaching practice. We call it, prática pedagógica. And other disciplines that involve a lot of pragmatics, for example. At the very moment, I myself am teaching something that includes pragmatics. I'm sure that some of my students are there. So this was very, very, very enriching. We have to thank you so very much for the whole presentation. But don't go yet before I check if there are any last questions that I missed here. So one of the students says that, yes, I am a new student from Letras English course. Everybody's very thankful to you. I guess that's it. Will you just tell us a little bit about the upcoming book for, I forgot the title of the book. You just said that it's about to come.
Myself,
which one? You, yeah.
Yeah, the intercultural, in designing intercultural materials. Is that what you mean?
The next one. Yeah. Can you tell us when this is going to be available?
Oh, well, look, please. I'm co-authoring this with a Hungarian professor, Professor Tamaskis and Kish, I should say, and we're working very hard on it. But it's look, if it comes out in I'd say beginning of 2023, I would say, to be honest. He's more positive. We're literally working on it as we speak. It's on my laptop, and we're zooming and everything. So we're literally working on it at the moment. But it's very really enjoying it, actually, and I'm learning a lot myself about it. Yeah.
Frida, I was actually talking about the yearbook, the yearbook of material development.
Oh, that book. Yes. Sorry.
Yeah, that book.
Yeah. The handbook, the Routledge handbook, is it? Yeah.
Yes, that's it.
Yeah. No, I just have one chapter in that, and that's being produced by Heather Buchanan and Jane, I can't remember her name. Anyway, by two authors in England. Now, as far as I know, they are hoping to publish this year, because they were doing the proof. So I would say sometime this year. Yeah, it's the Routledge handbook of materials development. Please, and it's massive. Yeah.
Savas, there's something there. If you have some time, please have a look at the work of Nikos Sifakis and his collaborators from the Enrich project. I'd say it's the Enrich project, which is a big move based on robust research work advocating EFL and ELT. Now that's good recommendation.
Yeah, thank you very much. I will do. And whoever, it's Domingos has posted this. And again, I'd be really interested in if you want to contribute something to Folio on this, that would be wonderful, because it's really good way of disseminating your work. So I certainly have a look. I just took a picture of that. But as I say, if you want to send me something to Folio, would be lovely.
Excellent, Frida. Sally, could you tell us about her approach? Is it still grammar based?
I'm not sure what you mean about my approach. Grammar based? No, I would say that course books are still grammar based, basically, fundamentally. But I'm not sure what you mean by my own teaching approach. Is that what you mean? Well, no, it would be much more.
I think that what she meant was just. What is your opinion on grammar based? I'm not really sure.
Yeah. No, well, I would, I much prefer an inductive approach to learning language. As Sally said, she found this challenging, and I get that. But it's been shown to produce, more durable learning. You can produce, you can show, you do the PPP thing where you show students the grammar rules, and they talk about it and they practice it. But that hasn't been particularly shown to be produce durable learning, whereby using inductive techniques, whereby students actually have to work and engage, has been it's been shown successful.
Perhaps I could take that and just ask you to make your comments on the communicative language teaching approach, because you did mention when I was reading the abstract, your abstract, it did say that there would be some criticisms on. Well, there was, the whole talk was somehow a criticism on the communicative approach. But still, we were very much focused on the course books and the way they are produced, not exactly on the methodology.
You see, I think it's my point isn't so much the approach itself, because the approach, like it was, when did it start? 1979 or something, and it's changed a lot over the years. I mean, it started off. See, I remember the communicative approach to begin with had completely no grammar in it. The students were just asked to interact and expected to pick up the grammar. And that was the original approach, as advocated in things like Streamline. But then there was kind of a kickback from users. They said, no, we actually want grammar. So what Coursebooks did then was they had still the overall sort of ethos, of communicative ethos. So there's communication and interaction, but they had to put more grammar, specific grammar into the coursebooks. And that's what you see now. So my beef isn't so much with the communicative approach itself. It's more that the way it's, number one, incorporated and changed by coursebooks, and mainly the fact that it doesn't necessarily fit the context in which the coursebooks are used. That was really where I was coming from.
Now that's interesting.
Yeah.
Alexandra says that maybe that's what she meant when she asked, because she was talking about the communicative dictatorship.
Yes. Yeah.
So I guess that's it for today. I ask anyone if they still have further questions to Frida. Perhaps they could send it to me. I would try to send them to you at another moment, Frida. Thank you so very much.
Very well. You're welcome. Thanks very much.
For your time and your kindness.
And thank you for your invitation, and thanks for your contribution, everybody.
Welcome.
Okay.
Bye, everyone. Have a good night. And magic word, I have to say that the keyword is, I don't know if it's already been said on the chat, it's coursebook.
Hashtag coursebook.
A palavra-chave é coursebook. Okay, guys?
Okay, thanks
for them to get the certificate. Thank you very much, Frida, again. Thank you.
Very welcome.
Bye.
Okay, bye for now. Bye.
You can just click on Leave Studio.